there, and welcome to Sometimes I Quilt. My name is Katie, and as it says on the tin, sometimes I do like to quilt. I identify as a quilter and have done so for, I think it's about how old the child is, 25, 30-ish years. But I've always crafted, so knitting, crochet, spinning, weaving, dyeing, all of the fun stuff. So over the last 25 odd years of quilting, I have started a lot of things, I have abandoned a lot of things, and I've finished some things along the way too. But like all things, there are periods of time where I just don't. So there's been a couple of years where I haven't touched fabric to cut and sew. I've still probably purchased, so we all know that they're two different hobbies, buying and using. But this little project of mine on YouTube is to try and document me doing the things. So yesterday, today's it's currently Sunday morning, so yesterday afternoon I spent the time upstairs in my sewing space sorting out some templates for hand piecing. So this is my process for that. I tend to use what I have on hand, but keeping in mind that I have a lot of stuff on hand. We might also discover when I dig out a tool or something that I bought at a craft show and thought at the time, this is really going to solve this problem, and then never touched it again. So maybe there'll be some of that too. Enjoy. So this here is the quilt that I'm going to be working on. It's called 36 Allbrook Hill. It's by Margaret Mew, and I'm working on borders today. One of the things about these particular types of patterns is that the hand piece borders mean that you need to cut out lots of pieces, you need templates and all that sort of stuff. When I originally started this quilt, so quite some time ago now, I did this in a class with Margaret Mew herself. And Margaret had a set of stamps that she used to stamp my fabric for me to help me out with that border. Unfortunately, I've hit a point where I need more pieces, and there's a whole other border that I'll show you that has the same thing. So I've had to go to the pattern and make some templates. So when I make templates for hand piecing, I tend to do them two different ways. So you can always buy templates, but if I need to make them myself, and what I'm done here is I've photocopied the pattern so that I've got the shapes that I need. Then I take my trusty glue pen, and yes, it's the same stuff that I use for English paper piecing. I will cut them all out, and then I will stick them down on another piece of paper. Now, future Katie, which I am, I know that I am making an error right about now. I'm sticking these things too close together, and I need to end up going back and redoing them. But what I'll do now, and where I've disappeared to, is I will now print that out on cardstock or on heavier cardboard. So it's the same cardboard that I use for English paper piecing on the rare moments that I do that. And I will print those out, and then I will cut those out as templates that I will then use to put together my fabric for hand piecing. So the next step in my process is that I will then start to mark lines that will essentially become my cutting lines. So when you're hand piecing, you've got the line that you will sew on, but then you've also got the line that you will cut on. And it is at about this point I say to myself, oh dear, I think these pieces are too close together. And I persevere for a moment, and then I have a little bit more of a think about how it is that I'm going to handle this when it comes time to cut the templates out. And then there's this beautiful moment where I remember that the glue will mean that these pieces are repositional, and I will be able to just go and do it again. Now, the thing about marking the lines that are my cutting lines is that, I mean, it's easier if I use a ruler. None of these pieces have got curves. They're all straight pieces. So a nice little straight ruler will do the job. What I'm using here is my 1/4 ruler, which is what I use for foundation paper piecing. It's really good for foundation paper piecing, but it's also really good for this purpose as well. I did weigh out whether I wanted to use one of the other rulers, but this is the one that I went with in the end. So as we go through, what I'll do here is I will essentially wait and get everything to a certain point, and then I will avail myself of my paper scissors, and then I will start to cut the pieces out. Doing the templates this way, particularly on the heavier card, so I think it's about a 120 or a 180 GSM or a 160, means that they're a little bit more sturdy. But there's something else that I will do with this in a moment that means that I can reuse these over and over and over again. Now, something else that you'll notice here is that I'm popping some corners on. So I'm cutting some bits. Well, I'm actually not cutting. I'm just reminding myself where it is that I will need to make sure that I'm blunting my corners or trimming them. Now, I'm lucky in that I'm going to be able to use the pieces that I already have to be able to show me where those are, those corners that we need to chop off are. And now we go on to the trimming section. So here we are, and I'm making the corners blunt. So I'm using the pieces that I have had before, and there we go. And it is at this point I remember I need to find something. I couldn't find the thing, so I needed to go for a quick trip down to Spotlight. And here we are back, slightly different angle. When I'm making my templates for hand piecing, I will try and do things so that the lines that get marked on the fabric are my cut lines and my corners. Now, you'll notice here that I'm using the hole punch. I do have another hole punch somewhere in the house, and I made the assumption at the moment that I've got this one, a new one, and brought it back in, that I would find the other one. But the hole punch means that I'm able to mark the corners. So if we have a look here, what I'm doing is I'm lining up where the holes are on the piece of fabric that's already the size that it needs to be, and I'm just blunting those corners because everything will just sit together so much nicer when you've got it done that way. I'm also being really careful not to cut my fabric, and I was successful in that. So the border that we're working on is this one here that you can see. It's a zigzaggy border. It finishes at 2 inches. Now, I used to have a design wall, and I can't actually have a design wall anymore. And this here is one of the reasons why. This is Liliana. She is having her birthday soon, I think. She must be turning 2. And Liliana likes to climb design walls and eat them. She was taught this by her older brother, Mishra. So Lily decided to come and help. And here we are figuring out the next border. So now I've got my templates. I need to start digging out the fabric that I need for the next section. Now, I'm going to start marking some fabric. So here's my sandpaper board. There's my guide, because getting things reversed can be catastrophic in this. Now, the pieces that I'm starting to cut out are for an outer border. So it's for the border that's going to go right around the outside of the quilt, and I'll show you that in a second. I'm looking for two colours that are darker. Now, the overall vibe that I'm going for this particular quilt is that it's a bit gothic adjacent. So you'll see when I show the applique centre that I've made some design choices that mean that, I've got sort of like Aunt Agatha is stuck in the attic and all of that sort of very Bronte sisters adjacent stuff. So the border that we're working on is the mirror of the one that's in the middle there that you can see that's on the pressing mat. But what we're actually working on is this outer border, so this one right at the end. Now, so far with this quilt, I've actually completed most of the applique that's in the middle. And now I just need to spend a little bit of time focusing on these borders. I've changed up the centre of this quilt quite a bit. So the house is still there, the raven's still there, but there's other bits and pieces that aren't. And all of this applique here has pretty much been completed. I just need to go back and add some bits and pieces in the centre. Now, that border that I was pointing at there, it hasn't made it into my quilt. So I've redesigned the centre of this away from what Margaret's done. But what I'm working on now is that very outer border. So I've got my pieces and I need two dark pieces of fabric. So I was going to go with a sort of a dark mauve, a dark purple, and something that's black, because I'm really wanting to bring home this whole gothic vibe that I had going with this quilt. The same background fabric that I've used in other parts of the fabric, other parts of the quilt will be used at the outer border as well. So I've got the black and I've got the purple. Now I just need to find the two pieces and I need to make sure that I've got them sitting the right way. And Mishra is just about to come wandering through. He's terribly helpful, you can tell. Off you go, Mish. You're in the way. Come on, off you go. So at this stage, I clear a space next to me, so Mish will move on. Anyhow, so we've got the black fabric and we've got a dark purple. So on the wrong side of the fabric, because that's where we're marking, and moving the pieces around on the sandpaper board is a little hard. Making sure, and I think I check again, or at least in my head I check again to make sure that we've got the right template. Now, marking tools. You'll notice here that I'm using a texter, a Crayola pen. I have started using these for a lot of my marking purposes. So I do a lot of hand quilting, I do a lot of marking of quilts, and I will generally speaking use the Crayola ultra washable markers for that. I've tested them out on all sorts of fabrics, but the reality is, particularly when you're doing applique and other type and hand piecing and things like that, that the fabric and it's going to be cut on the solid line, and I've just put the dots there to mark the corners. The fabric is going to need to be sewn in such a way that the permanent lines shouldn't show anyway. So I'm cutting out one side and then I'll grab my purple fabric and we'll go to the wrong side of that. You'll note that I haven't pressed it, thought about it, but then realised that my pressing mat is currently in use. And now I am making sure that I'm using the right pieces. And and here we go. Now, you'll note at this point that I pay absolutely no attention whatsoever to the grain lines. There is a grain line there, and I am pretty much ignoring it. I've been quilting for a very, very long time, and I've had my odd run-in with the quilt police over the years. This quilt that I'm making is for me. It's a Gothic vibe quilt that I want for me. So I'm not terribly hung up on grain lines and things like that. What I will be more interested in this particular case is how the print is going to sit with the other piece. So what I will probably do is cut all of the pieces out in this particular orientation. Because of the way that the print is, it will sit in a particular way in the quilt. The other reality with this particular quilt is that it's going to be probably hand quilted. At this stage, it'll be hand quilted. So it will be pretty forgiving because I'll be doing it myself, so I'll be the one arguing with it. So now we're pushing everything away, and we get to see me panic for a moment about how it's all sitting together. And then I realise I can just change them over. And there we go. So then we're going to see that this border is the same. So I just grab one of the pieces that's already cut out for the inner border that I'm working on. And now we're going to sew these together. So when I'm sewing these together, what I'll do is I'll use those dots that I used the hole punch and that I put on the fabric to guide where it is that I need to start and stop. If the pieces were larger, I would put the pieces together and I would mark bits and pieces where there would be corresponding points so that I could keep everything on track. The other thing that I really love I'm loving at this particular point in time is this pressing mat. So I'm using the pressing mat as a really big pin cushion. It also works really nicely as a design wall. But we're not telling the cats that because they haven't actually tried to eat the pressing mat at all, which is really good news for me and for the vet. So the thread that I'm using here is an Aurifil 80 weight. Generally speaking, people use this sort of weight fabric for applique, and I use it for applique as well. Don't mind me, I just stuffed myself. But I have found that particularly with micro piecing, and this would be an example of micro piecing, so really small pieces, that the finer weight thread works really, really well. Now I'm just making sure that I'm starting on the dots. I haven't pinned this piece. I will pin if I need to pivot, and you'll see me do that in a moment. So working with the 80 weight thread, and the needle that I'm using here isn't brilliant. Working with the 80 weight thread means that it sits really nicely once it's all sewn and put together. So I'm just going from point to point. I'll do a little back stitch halfway through, and then I'll do a little back stitch here at the end. And then we'll snip the thread. Then we'll start to have a look and see what that looks like when it opens up. I really like this border. It's a variation on a zigzag, and then it finishes at 2 inches. So it's a really nice border. I think I prefer it over a straight zigzag border. So I'm going to grab some pins for this bit because I need to pivot. So I will sew from one end to the middle and then the middle to the other end. I know that some quilters will start from end to middle both sides, but because of the sizes of the pieces that I'm working with here and how accurate I'm able to be with it, I'm not that bothered by it. So put a knot in the thread. And off we go. So I really enjoy my handwork. I love hand piecing. I love a hand applique, and I do probably quite a bit of it. I say that, but I also machine quilt a lot of quilts as well. When we're quilting, and this is what it comes through for me, is one of the reasons why I love hand piecing and hand quilting is that it can be really meditative. So I can just sit and do. I've got, you can see the little Japanese fabric bag there. That's got all of my hand piecing in it. So I can pick that up and go to a friend's house and sit and stitch. It's always ready to go. So if I've got stitching group, or if I've got some sort of other thing where I'm going to have space and time, I can just sit there and hand stitch. And I'm still being social for the most part. I'm still interacting with the people around me, but I'm also able to feel like I get something done. So the job my day job is one that you don't always see progress in what you're doing every day. It can take a long time for things to happen. So one of the things that I really enjoy about quilting is that once I quilt something, unless I get the seam ripper out, it stays done. And I can actually see the progress. So I'm pivoting the corner here, and we're doing a Y seam. Don't be afraid of Y seams. They're not that scary, particularly when you're hand piecing them, because you can just pin and pivot. And I was just making sure that I had hit my dot point. And then we pull this bit up so that we're not catching it and we don't have a little pleat in our Y seam. And then we just sew up the other side. Now what this is going to do is it's going to give us one little unit. And one of the things that I need to do now is to go and count and see how many of these units I actually do need, because I predict it's a lot. So I'll need to cut out a whole lot of other pieces and get them ready to go. So what I've got in my little bag is I've got a whole lot of little Ziploc bags that have got all of the little different components of the quilt. And so I will get myself a Ziploc bag, or four, maybe one for each side, and I will start putting together the outer border. And this is the last piece of this quilt that I needed to start working on. So all of the other bits have either been done or they're almost finished. So this is really the last bit. So I'm just finishing this stitch off here. Getting things out of the way. And there we go. The Y seam's going to sit there nicely. Now, one of the things that we will do, and I'll show you here, is when I press this, I will press it so that it's like that, so that it spins around the center, because then that means that that center point is going to sit nice and flat. Thanks for spending Saturday afternoon with me. See you next time.